This is the BIGUODIR Rx80. I've had this for a bit now, and a few people ask me about it, so here's my take. It's a big, heavy, fat tire e-bike that leans more toward utility and rough road riding than something light and nimble. If you want a bike you can carry upstairs, hang on a wall rack, or toss on a small trunk rack by yourself, this probably isn't the one. If you want something that can handle broken pavement, dirt paths, sand, or snow with less drama, and you also want enough power to keep a steady pace on the road, that's where the Rx80 makes more sense. What makes it different, at least from what I usually get asked about, is the mix of a high-power hub motor feel with a frame and tire setup that's clearly built around stability. It's not trying to feel like a normal mountain bike. It feels closer to a small, quiet commuter machine that happens to have pedals, and it's happiest when you ride it that way. The first thing you notice in person is the size. The 26-inch fat tires look oversized, and the bike carries its weight high enough that you feel it when you're moving it around the garage or lining it up to roll out the door. Mine is around 75 pounds, and that number matters because it changes how you live with it. Tight storage situations become annoying. Turning it around in a hallway is annoying. Lifting the front end to get over a step is doable, but you feel it in your back and arms. Once it's moving, the weight becomes less of a problem, and it actually helps it feel planted at speed. But off the bike, you're reminded quickly that this isn't a lightweight bicycle. Build-wise, the frame feels solid. I don't get creaks or that hollow flex feeling when I push it hard, and the welds look clean enough that nothing jumps out as sloppy. The suspension is there for comfort more than precision. On rough streets with potholes and cracked asphalt, it takes the edge off. On dirt trails and washboard gravel, it keeps the bike from beating you up. It's not the kind of suspension that makes me want to start sending jumps, but for the riding most people actually do, curbs, bad roads, packed dirt, some loose stuff, it does its job. The contact points are pretty normal. The seat is fine for short to medium rides, and I ended up adjusting the angle a little to fit my posture. The handlebars have a comfortable sweep, and the riding position is upright enough that I'm not folded over the front. I'm in that range where the fit works without feeling stretched, but I will say this bike makes more sense for average to taller riders. The frame is tall and the bike is bulky, and that's before you add winter gear or a backpack. Setup was mostly straightforward, but I wouldn't call it zero effort. Mine arrived mostly put together, but I still had to take my time checking bolts and getting the front end aligned correctly. I also had to do some basic tuning on the shifting to make it feel clean across the 7-speed range. It wasn't broken, it just wasn't dialed in the way I'd want to ride it out of the box. Same story with the brakes. They worked, but I like a firmer lever feel, so I did some bedding in and minor adjustment. If you've assembled bikes before, you'll be fine. If you haven't, you might want to shop to do a safety check, especially because this bike can move fast enough that small setup mistakes matter. In daily use, the removable 48-volt, 20-amp-hour battery is one of the more practical parts of living with it. I can take it inside to charge, instead of dragging the whole bike near an outlet. Charging speed felt reasonable with the included charger. I typically top it off between rides, rather than running it dead. Range is one of those topics where I don't like repeating big claims, because it depends on everything. Wind, hills, tire pressure, rider weight, how much throttle you use, and how fast you ride. What I can say from my own riding is that if I'm using a lot of throttle and keeping the pace high, the battery drops faster than you'd expect if you're coming from lower power e-bikes. If I'm using pedal assist and riding at a more relaxed speed, it stretches out a lot better. For me, it's a bulk I plan around like a small electric vehicle. I think about my route, I think about how much assist I'm going to use, and I don't assume I'm getting the same distance every time. On the road, the motor has that strong hub motor shove when you get on the throttle. It's the kind of acceleration that's fun the first few times, and then it becomes something you manage, because it's easy to spin the rear tire a bit on loose surfaces if you're not smooth. The top speed on mine is around 30 miles per hour, and I'll be honest, I don't ride it pinned at that speed very often. Not because it can't do it, but because at that speed, you start paying attention to things like wind, road surface, and steering feel a lot more. I did notice a bit of front-end lightness and some mild shake when I'm pushing the speed on less than perfect pavement. It's not violent, but it's enough that I keep both hands on the bars and I make sure everything is tightened and aligned. If you buy a bike like this, you really do need to periodically check fasteners, especially after the first few rides. The fat tires are a huge part of why this bike works. On broken city streets, they smooth things out in a way skinny tires can't. On hard-packed dirt, it feels stable and predictable. On sand and snow, you still have to ride with the conditions in mind, but the extra width helps you float instead of knife in. Tire pressure makes a bigger difference here than people think. If you run them too hard, the ride gets harsh and traction drops. If you run them too soft, the steering can feel vague and you can feel the tires squirm in corners. Once I found a pressure that matched my weight and terrain, it started feeling consistent. Braking is handled by hydraulic disc brakes, and that's something I consider basically necessary on a bike this heavy that can go this fast. In normal riding, they stop confidently, and in wet conditions, they've been predictable for me. I still give myself more stopping distance than I would on a lighter bike, because momentum is momentum, and you can't cheat physics. If you plan to ride fast regularly, keep an eye on pad wear. On a heavier e-bike, pads disappear quicker than you might be used to. The screen is simple, readable, and it gives me what I need while I'm riding: speed, battery info, distance. There's also a USB port, which I've used to keep my phone alive on longer rides. I wouldn't rely on it as a fast charger, but it's enough to prevent battery anxiety when you're running mats. One thing I don't love is that battery bars can feel a little optimistic early on, and then drop faster later. That's not unique to this bike, but it's worth saying because if you're planning a long ride, it's better to think in terms of how the bike usually behaves for you, not just what the display says in the first few miles. As far as smart features go, this isn't an app-based experience, at least in the way some commuter e-bikes are. You're not pairing it to your phone for deep settings or route tracking. It's more old school: screen, assist levels, throttle, lights. I personally don't mind that. Fewer things to troubleshoot, fewer accounts to make, fewer updates. The flip side is, you're also not getting those app conveniences, so if you like tuning detailed power curves or logging rides automatically, this isn't built around that. Real-world testing for me looked like a mix of commuting roads, rough neighborhood pavement, and weekend paths where I'd normally take a mountain bike. On steep hills, the torque is the story. It doesn't feel fragile or strained. It just keeps pulling, and I don't have to stand up and grind the way I would on a weaker e-bike. That said, if you're using throttle heavily on climbs, you can almost watch the battery drop. It's a trade. You get the shove, you pay for it in watt hours. Carrying stuff is another area where this bike makes sense. The rear rack and included accessories help with errands. I've used it for grocery runs, and it stayed stable as long as I kept the load reasonable and balanced. The bike's rated for a higher total weight than many e-bikes, and you can feel that it's designed with that in mind. The downside is again the same downside. It's big. Parking it in tight bike racks can be awkward. Getting it through narrow doors can be awkward. You learn the best angles over time. So here's how I'd sum it up after actually riding it. The BIGUODIR Rx80 is for someone who wants a powerful, stable e-bike that can deal with rough roads and mixed terrain, and who is okay with the trade-offs that come with a heavy fat tire build. The strengths are the strong motor feel, the confidence from the wide tires, the comfort from the suspension on bad surfaces, and the general sense that it can take a beating in normal use. The limitations are the weight, the bulk, the fact that you need to pay attention to setup and maintenance, and the reality that riding fast on a heavy e-bike demands more awareness than people expect. If you're the kind of rider who wants something simple to live with, light to handle, and easy to store, I'd look elsewhere. If you want something that feels steady, has enough power for hills and headwinds, and you don't mind treating it more like a small vehicle than a bicycle, this one fits that use case pretty well. If you've got questions about anything I didn't cover, or you want me to test a specific scenario with it, leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel for more reviews like this, and thank you for watching.